Welcome, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started here. If folks would go ahead and take their seats. I now call to order this meeting of the Assembly Rules Committee. It is Thursday, August 11, 2022, and we are noticed from 1 to 3 p.m. Let's go ahead and start with Assembly member introductions for the record.
Cameron Perez-Verdilla.
Daniel Wolland.
Kevin Cross.
Forrest Dunbar.
Christopher Constant.
Suzanne LaFrance, and on the phone, I believe we have 3 members. Ms. Quinn Davidson, are you there?
I am. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Rivera?
I'm here.
Thank you. Mr. Solt?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other members on the phone? Okay. Thank you. Thank you all for being here today and for joining us for this meeting. I do want to note that we will be making a change to the agenda. The recent developments with the former Anchorage Health Director, Joe Gerace, namely the misrepresentation of his credentials, background, and military experience, have raised a number of questions about process and is a matter of public interest and concern. So the Vice Chair and I would like, after the reports, the initial reports, to use the time during this meeting to discuss how members want to proceed with addressing this very serious matter. So we will be adding this item to the agenda under new business. It'll be item B, and then we'll just move everything down. So with that, we will go ahead and I'll just give a real quick report, and then we'll move on to the other reports, and then we'll also hear briefly from Mr. Perez-Verdilla. And actually, this is a Rules Committee meeting, so we can use first names. We'll hear from Cameron after that. I want to let members know that I'm scheduling 2 special Rules Committee meetings, one August 25th and the other September 22nd, because we have a bit of a backlog of items to discuss, and we'll be, in all likelihood, moving some of the items from today's meeting to a future meeting if we run out of time. I want to note that I think everybody is aware of the bus staffing issue at the Anchorage School District, and the mayor is working with the Superintendent Bryant, to help with the recruitment of drivers. And I shared with members an email that some of the members who have students in ASD schools likely received. And I just wanted to call attention to it because it has some links that gives additional information about what the school district is doing. And I know some members have already received inquiries from constituents. I reached out to the mayor's office and asked how the assembly could support the efforts of the municipality. And I reached out as well to the superintendent and the school board president, asking how the assembly might be able to support the school district, as the bus driver shortage poses some pretty big challenges to a number of families here in our community. And then finally, I just want to note that Mr. Peterson actually is at the AML, Alaska Municipal League convention in Sitka, and I wanted to call attention to the local government conference that will be coming up. It's been moved from November to December, and there is a newly elected officials portion of that conference as well. It's here in Anchorage. I don't have the date confirmed on that, but we'll get that information out to you, and members may want to attend that. And I do want to note for the record that Mr. Peterson is excused and Ms. Zelatel is also excused today. And then with that, I will turn to the Assembly Legislative Liaison. Allie, will you be giving the report or any update? We can come back to you too. we'll come back to you. We'll move on for now to hear from the municipal clerk, Barbara.
Hello, thank you, Suzanne, for giving me an opportunity to give you a brief update. I always tell you three things. So today I am going to tell you that number one, we have 2 new staff members this summer. You may have heard from Amelia. She is our business license assistant, handling liquor licenses and general business licenses. And then we also hired a records clerk, and her name is Jasmine. And we're really happy to have them on board, which leads to my second point. The clerk's office is getting caught up with documents and meetings and all of the details that we handle for you. And we are very excited about that. We like doing those details and records and things. And the third thing that I was going to tell you is that we have an email that's going to go out to all of the members from the elections team that is going to update you about petitions. There are 3 types of petitions. They are initiative petitions and referenda petitions, which are handled one way, and recall petitions, which are handled a little bit differently. And we're going to send you an update about how those are processed and give you some examples. We'll send you the application and then the what's called the master form of the petition, and you will be able to see that. If you have any questions, you can let election administrator Jamie Heinz or I know. And of course, I don't know if you know this, we have a policy in the clerk's office that we answer all telephone calls and emails within 24 hours. That's our goal. And we will let you know that we do that with all constituent inquiries. Some of you know that sometimes you have a constituent inquiry that you forward to us and you say, I'm forwarding this inquiry, and if you'd like to, please copy me on the response to my constituent. And of course, we would be happy to do that. So I just wanted to let you know those things, and we'll include that in the email about petitions. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Barbara. Cameron, do you want to go ahead and give your update?
Sure. Thanks for the time. Hopefully I won't take too much time, but I'll just first say more to come on this. I wanted to just take a few moments to sort of seed this so that folks are aware that this is going on. There is a group of people, community leaders, who have been meeting for quite some time, and we are getting ready to develop a formal resolution, and working with Mr. Falsey, who I've not even spoken to about this yet, but you're on the hook already, and to bring forth the development of a group called the Anchorage Equity Advisory Committee. And I'll just give a little bit of background here real quick. The committee began as the Anchorage COVID-19 Vaccine Advisory Committee, convened by the Anchorage Health Department in February 2021 to advise the health department on vaccine distribution and pandemic response. The committee met monthly to engage from AHD. The committee reviewed data, strategy, and advised AHD on equitable distribution of COVID-19 vaccines, testing, and messaging to address disparities experienced by multiple underserved communities during the pandemic. Due to this engagement, Anchorage made measurable improvements in vaccine rates, community acceptance of testing and vaccination, and reduced the impacts of COVID-19 among multiple Anchorage communities. In December of 2022, the health department determined it no longer needed to engage with this committee. The members determined that they would like to build upon the successful engagement and actions during 2022 to remain together as a body and to continue the committee's advisory role. At the invitation of 2 Anchorage Assembly members, the committee has reformed as the Anchorage Equity Advisory Committee to work with the Anchorage Assembly to build an equitable, thriving community for all. This group has been working and has developed a draft charter, which is pretty comprehensive in terms of the sort of the purpose and role that this potentially would play. And the intention at this point is to engage with Suzanne and Felix and bring in Mr. Falsey. They have elected 2 co-chairs for this group, so we'll invite those folks in as well. And the hope is to bring more specifics to you soon in terms of how this would be formally created and what the processes around it would be. But I can just say that the hope is that this really large and dynamic group of community leaders that represent many different communities in Anchorage would both serve as an advisory body to the Assembly across all topics. So regardless of what the issue was, they would be there to bring potential legislation to ideas, that sort of thing, and bounce those off, as well as this group would be a group that would bring things to the Assembly as well, because of the connection they have with community and the ideas that they would bring. So I feel like that this is a really exciting and powerful group of people that hopefully will not only allow us to do more and do better, but improve our community as a whole. So more to come on that, but I'm happy to answer any questions. But we should be able to get some documents prepared soon. And thank you, Allie, for Allie has agreed to kind of help to support as well a little bit. Thanks. That's it.
Thank you, Cameron. So we'll go back to Allie for a legislative services update.
Yeah, thanks. Allie Hartman, I'm the communications coordinator in legislative services. And if Claire is on the phone, I'm happy to give an update on some legislative services projects that are hopefully helping you out. And Claire, you're welcome to chime in at any point as well. Just a couple of office related updates today. I'm excited to share with those of you that don't already have a member handbook, some member handbooks, which is very exciting. Our 3 most recent members received those handbooks as part of their orientation. And so Claire, Barbara, and myself thought that it would be helpful for that to be a resource available to every member. And for those of you that aren't able to be here today, you'll find those in your mailboxes. Also new in the office, you will find some very cool, very large updated district maps. So we printed off and laminated district maps for each of your offices, including one to take to the Eagle River Chugiak office. So feel free to take that and drop it off there if you'd like. I also would be remiss if I didn't congratulate y'all on an amazing run to the finish line, sprint to the finish line on ARPA projects. So we're really excited to have been supportive of that effort and thankful to all of you who really put in the time and energy to get that across the finish line. At this point, we're working to now pass the baton to the administration, communicating with awardees what the next steps are, and giving that handoff as they now work with Ken Miller, who is the ARPA grant administrator on contract moving forward. Kind of coinciding with that, we're excited to be working with these awardees, celebrating this partnership and obviously the vital role that they play and the way that you all have been able to invest in these community resources. So you'll see some exciting updates. Thank you to those of you that have given us feedback on the recovery dashboard. And if you haven't gotten the chance to check that out, you have the opportunity to take a look at that and send me feedback. We're looking forward to launching that publicly and sharing even 2022 projects here in the next week or so. And then we'll also encourage awardees to stay connected with us, right? And share their story, communicate events and opportunities that are happening. And of course, be sure that they're recognizing the Assembly for your investment in them as well. So that's it for me.
Thank you, Allie. And I'm remiss in not thanking staff for all the work on the ARPA process and everything you all did, you and Claire and Desiree and Shelley and Dean as well. So thank you so much. And thanks to the members too. That was a long haul. And I think that it was a thorough process and appreciate everyone who contributed to that. Okay, so with that, we'll go ahead and move on to the item of business that was added. And again, the intent here is to get feedback from members on how to proceed with addressing the matter concerning the recent development with the former Anchorage Health Department Director and the misrepresentation of credentials, background, and experience. Before we move into that discussion, I do want to call attention to what the charter and code say about the roles of the mayor and the assembly in regards to executive appointments that are subject to confirmation. Actually, here's a handout with a couple sites, if you'll pass that around, and there are extras for anyone in the room. The first one is Charter Section 502, Powers of the Mayor, one that we have referred to numerous times when we conduct confirmation hearings. And that states that the mayor shall appoint all heads of municipal departments subject to confirmation by the assembly on the basis of professional qualifications. Persons appointed by the mayor serve at the pleasure of the mayor. And the second is a citation of Anchorage Municipal Code 3.30.173. It is under personnel and executives, recruitment and appointment. I'll go ahead and read it because one aspect that has become germane in this discussion is that executive appointments are handled differently from other types of personnel hires. And so again, for those who may be on the phone, this is 3.30.173. Executive positions, by their nature and complexity, are not subject to the normal procedures of recruitment and selection applicable to other classified positions. The mayor or responsible official of the appointing authority may utilize any recruitment and referral sources and techniques that is deemed appropriate to obtain the highest caliber employees for these positions, and may appoint whomever is determined to best discharge the duties of an executive position at the discretion of the mayor or responsible official of the appointing authority, subject to the merit provisions of the charter and this code. Prior to an executive employee being hired, the individual shall have submitted a municipal employment application form, including a resume describing relevant education, training, and experience. Upon hiring, the resume shall become a public record and be included within the employee's personnel file. There are other sections of code members are familiar with that also address confirmation hearings or confirming the appointment of principal executives. That's AMC 2.30.095. AMC 3.20.020 further addresses powers of the mayor. And I bring this up because Assembly leadership is seeking clarity on the extent of the Assembly's powers concerning executive confirmations, and specifically our role and duty. For example, can the Assembly independently verify the credentials of the mayor's nominees? We are seeking a legal opinion with counsel to be shared with the body. So I'll go over 3 areas that the vice chair and I have identified and any accompanying actions, and then I'll turn to the vice chair and we'll open it up for discussion. The first, what happened? How were the misrepresented credentials of this individual brought forward to the Assembly? Assembly leadership intends to engage in fact-finding. This will include questions to the administration, a work session or work sessions, and possibly an executive session in a special meeting if needed. Second, what are the impacts to the municipality of having an individual with misrepresented qualifications lead the Anchorage Health Department? You know, we often talk about the health department as a third leg of the public safety stool, and every department in the municipality is important. The health department is particularly important for issues of public safety. We have seen the loss of employees. We know that HUD funds were not applied for. We had a health department director who was comfortable submitting fraudulent documents to the municipality. What documents did he sign? What disciplinary actions did he conduct? What grants were administered? What contracts did he execute? Assembly leadership intends to, as a first step, engage the audit committee to try to determine the extent of the possible impacts on the municipality. And then finally, how do we prevent the situation from happening again? Much of the path forward may depend on the outcome of the options identified by council in light of the extent of the assembly's powers. There are questions concerning code. It's my understanding that Chapter 3 of Municipal Code, it hasn't been updated in a while and may warrant a closer look and some changes. And again, we hope to take this time to get feedback from members and help identify a path forward. And so I'll go ahead and turn now to the vice chair.
Thank you. So I'll essentially repeat what the chair said, just in brief, summarize that we have 3 steps that we anticipate from here without input from the body yet. And we're definitely here for questions. One is, how did we get here? What were the misrepresentations? How was this information presented to us? What are the impacts of the activities of that individual on the municipality and the people who, provided to us the information that he was qualified? Most important to me are the messages we heard from former employees who left the department under the term of Mr. Drace and how they left. Were there any records put into people's employee folders that were of the nature that were disciplinary, that might reflect on them in their future jobs? And then, of course, what we've seen is, I think Mr. Presverdia had mentioned it, that he is one of the things that he did back in the very beginning was ended that equity board. And that's just one simple example. And so we need to come to grips with all of the actions this individual has made so we can have an understanding of how to proceed. And then finally, where do we go from here in the context of future appointees? What level of scrutiny is allowed? What level of scrutiny is necessary? And how do we ensure that this never happens again? And with that said, one thing that we both agreed on today, the purpose of this meeting is not so much to dive into the details and the facts and what we think happened or may not have happened, but instead to ask the members what questions that they have that we should be rolling into a package of a process that includes a visit to the audit committee, who will work probably with the internal auditor to begin the process of getting to what kinds of actions this individual has done on his official capacity and other things. And so for now, the real thing is, what are the questions that we have that we need to answer? This is open conversation. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chris. First in the queue is Randy and then Mr. Dunbar. Go ahead, Randy.
Thank you, Ms. LaFrance. I imagine I speak on behalf of everyone and how disappointing this situation is, and that someone could make misrepresentations and the degree of representations that were made in this case. So I totally agree we need a better vetting process going forward. I'd like to see something maybe a little efficient as possible. So whether we're vetting through a muni process, but use a common process for our assembly, for the mayor, for the city. And I think it's absolutely critical that we do our due diligence to check references, check certifications, check degrees. Not necessarily check everything, but to the point that we feel comfortable that a resume or an applicant is being forthright with their experience and certifications. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. And go ahead, Chris.
Thank you. So, and Mr. Salt, that gets right to the crux of one of the questions that Ms. LaFrance put on the table, and that's the question of what are our powers in this? And there have been a number of conversations back and forth between council and other staff. And in some ways, it's really broadly up to the discretion of the executive to put forward nominees. And we don't likely have the power to do background checks and investigations into individuals, and we rely on the administration. And so that's one of the questions that we're going to be investigating as we move forward, is what are the bounds? So when you talk about coming up with a uniform process for executive appointees, the reason the chair read and provided to members of the charter section and the code section is because these executive appointees have an extraordinarily broad latitude, or the mayor, I should say, has an extraordinarily broad latitude in making appointments. And so the traditional HR processes do not apply. And so that's where one of the questions we have to explore. So I think you hit it on the head, and figuring out what the most effective way to do that is one of the top questions.
So we'll go through the queue. I've got Forrest next, then Felix, and then Kevin. Forrest?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, a statement off of what Chris just said, that the mayor has broad powers to appoint. We also have broad, and I would argue, unlimited powers to vote no. And that is our sole power. We can vote yes or we can vote no. And the charter section there at the top, a subject for another day, but I think there are some very important commas in that document, much like there are important commas in the Second Amendment in our jurisprudence. Anyway, so some questions I have. One, Chris, you mentioned employees that have left the municipality, but if there are employees at the health department who have concerns they want to express but don't feel comfortable and need some anonymous way to do that, I'm curious how we could set that up, or if it could be set up, because we know that emails that come to our official email address are public record. But we also know, I think we have heard, that in certain municipal departments, there is a culture of fear where people are very worried to speak out about these things. But there are still people who have hung on at the health department who also need to have their voices heard. So figuring out a way to do that, whether it's an executive session doesn't feel exactly right to me, but some way to do that. You mentioned the municipal auditor, and I'm sort of curious what exactly the municipal auditor's role is or could be, particularly. So on the impact question, I think that's clear. I'm wondering if the municipal auditor can also get into the question of how this happened. Because they do. I mean, for example, when there's a purchase card abuse, they go and they dig and they figure out, okay, why was this purchase card abused? And can they fulfill a similar role here? And if not, do we have to hire outside counsel or some other kind of third-party investigator to do this? I said on the record at the last assembly meeting, this week's assembly meeting, I think there was a failure in the HR department here, and to have the HR department investigate itself doesn't feel very effective to me, and I don't think it will. I don't think that will hold water for much of the public. So I'm looking for another way to do that. Oh shoot, I had one more. I'm blanking on it now, so I'll get back in the queue once I think of it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Forrest. Next is Felix, then Kevin, then Cameron.
Before we move, Madam Chair, I would just say that we've asked Ali, our staff, to kind of track these questions for us to make sure we have them in a centralized place, and we'll address them in a systematic manner.
Thank you, Chris. Felix?
Yeah, thanks. So I have sort of 3 lines of thinking here. First is I am particularly interested in the confirmation hearing process, which occurred for Mr. Gervais. As folks know, there were a variety of different allegations that came out, which eventually were discussed in executive session, and which led me to voting no on the confirmation for Mr. Gervais. I want to know if HR did anything to investigate those claims, or if they just on face value dubbed those as a witch hunt or character assassination. So that's one thing that I am particularly interested in. Second is sort of on top of the fiduciary aspects of what Mr. Gerace did as the head of the health department, particularly interested in any of the policy changes which occurred in the health department during Mr. Gerace's tenure as the director. So that's a second issue that I'm particularly interested in tracking. And then third, I know there are a lot of questions about what our powers are, what we can do to investigate this issue further versus what the administration is doing. And for me, a starting point for any kind of investigation that we may enter upon would be to talk with former HR directors, particularly around hiring practices, how they, especially around executives, how they treated those and top level executives like Mr. Gerace was, how they treated those hirings. Because I am not at all convinced by the defense that the administration gave to the public in the assembly on Tuesday. And then, it would be interesting just to hear from former HR directors about how they would handle a situation like this. Would they ask for an independent investigation? So those are the three lines of inquiries I'm interested in. Thanks.
Thank you, Felix. Next is Kevin, then Cameron, then Daniel.
Thank you. Yeah, everybody's made some excellent points here and obviously some grave concerns. And I do want to point out Forrest was absolutely right. We do have the right to vote no. It does require our vote. So I would like to know, I know that we have to treat all employees or all appointees equal and fairly, but to what degree are we checking the references, or are they checking the references of individuals? Okay. In my experience, employees typically of as profound a nature as this particular role was, they typically only put the references they want you to hear from on it. Are we going deeper? Are we checking who else should we be talking to about this candidate? And because it seems to me like with some simple questions and investigation, we could have found out quite a bit about this particular circumstance. So what is the reference? What is the reference check process look like? Because it seems like that failed miserably. And then additionally, what other requirements can we put in? And you've said this, but I mean, when we get an applicant, we typically get a copy of their resume, but we don't see what did references say. Can we request that information? Can we request if there was any kind of background check or anything that was done? And I wouldn't say this would happen on everybody, but I think as an assembly, depending on the role of the individual, we would have greater concerns. Depending on what that role is and the impact they can have. Like you said, the health department being 1/3, being a section of it. And so perhaps there's some additional protocols that need to be put in place depending on what that role is. And can we do that in specific instances, or, does the process have to be equal across the board, even if it's minor staff? So thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. And just because we're tracking questions here, I just ask a follow-up. When you say we, I assume you're talking about the municipality.
Yes. Thank you. Yes, we as a collective,
municipality.
we're all in this together. But yes, I'm thinking specifically as the executive and the legislative.
Okay, thanks. Because as we've talked about too, as we get clarity on the extent of the assembly's powers and clarity too on whether or not it's possible to do things that the HR department does, such as background checks. I just wanted to get clarification on.
Or is it unreasonable for us to establish a standard that if the resume does not include these items, we just won't consider it? You're welcome to put anyway, but you have a standard. We can have a standard as well.
And the we there is the assembly? Okay.
Would be the assembly. That's correct. Thank you.
Got it. And
Thank you.
Chris has a follow-up, and then we'll go through the queue. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Chris.
in our discussions today, somebody brought up the issue that the Supreme Court recently adjudged that an appointee that doesn't receive an up or down vote in the state level, at least, becomes in that position. And so I think we'll have to look very carefully in relationship to our powers and the state law and the Constitution and what's been decided. I don't know that we'll be able to just say we won't hear from you. I think that we will probably have to take an active vote up or down, right? But with what you were suggesting, and we'll talk about this as we move through the process, it could very well be that the default for folks recommended is no if it doesn't include key information, but not that we won't hear it.
And our council will provide some helpful guidance on that. So next is Cameron.
Thank you. I want to take us back to not just the appointment of Mr. Gerace, but my recollection in this room, the appointment of many of the people who now serve in their positions, and my memory, and I'm going to go back and listen to some of those recordings, because time after time people were brought before us who, to be kind, were non-traditional appointees. I remember in this room questioning someone because it wasn't clear on their resume whether they had a bachelor's degree or not. And I asked them, and finally we really learned they didn't have a bachelor's degree and were being appointed to an executive level position. And time after time, I recall the response when I asked questions about a number of appointees is they touted their life experience or other kinds of experience, that these kinds of things aren't always a determination as to whether they are going to be a good employee in this role or not. And so I think where there's smoke, there's fire, and that this is a clear indication that there's a breakdown in the system, and that we may very well have others who are working for us that are absolutely not qualified to be in the position they're in. And so I really want us to take this very seriously. I do not feel comfortable having the administration conduct their own administration. I absolutely believe that we need to have an independent investigation to understand about what was done, what processes were used and were not used. I think it's really important that all of the appointments that came forth under this administration be reviewed again, and that we know the facts about those. I also really wanted to point out that we really need to make sure that that going forward, that there is a practice in place that we can depend on. And I'm curious about the attorney's perspective about our powers, but we really need to bring in some independent, not only auditors, but also maybe even potentially some independent HR folks that can guide us through this process. So to say the least, I am shocked, I'm disappointed, and I really feel like that we need to take the time to dig deep into this and understand what happened and how we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Cameron. Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you. Two things. One of the parts of the process that we had discussed earlier is probably taking the opportunity at least to have a visit with former HR directors of the municipality who have perspective on how processes have worked for that kind of guidance. And so whether we hire independent HR folks or not, that's another conversation, or methodologies of reviewing qualifications that are sent to us by the administration. So that's kind of one of the things we're going to work towards. And I just want to say, I seem to recall very plainly you asking some fair questions and being directly attacked by the HR director for calling that quote good man and, you know, smearing his quote good reputation. And so I recall that very plainly. And so there was a process in place that was gaslighting, to say the least, in its effort to ensure that this mayor was able to have his appointees that he wanted. So I apologize for that process. We weren't more assertive in pushing back against the administration in their approach to dealing with assembly members in the process of their appointments.
Next in the queue is Daniel, and then Forrest.
Thank you. I have a thought and then sort of a question. My first thought is just that as a healthcare provider, I am very disturbed that we had somebody at the helm of the Anchorage Health Department implementing healthcare policy who was not qualified to do so. And I've been hearing from many of my colleagues and many healthcare professionals who are concerned, and it's unfortunate, and it causes me to not trust that I can rely on the administration to vet appointees. Zooming out of this particular instance, I think we need clarity around the future of the health department. I'm very concerned because what we've seen happen at the library, where we've now had an acting director who doesn't have the qualifications to be in her current role for a long time. And it seems like we have this mechanism now where we can have somebody in the position of a director sort of de facto without confirmation by the assembly. So I think that's something that we need to look at. Thank you.
Okay, real quick, Chris.
Sorry to keep jumping in. The thing that I have heard broadly from the public is, are we going to see a t-shirt next that says, "I'm with Judy and Joe"?
Thank you, Chris. Forrest?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Two questions and, well, sort of a thought and a question. So one question is, and it's sort of a policy question for the administration, so it might not be one that we are capable of answering, but it is, and I honestly can't recall, maybe Mr. Falsey can, the idea of having the HR director be the primary pitch man for appointments. I don't recall if that was the case in the prior administration. I don't believe it was. Now that we know that the HR director is going to be the primary vetter, and in this administration also the primary investigator of any mistakes made, it seems incredibly inappropriate that they would also be the primary sort of cheerleader for the appointment. And so who is the more appropriate person to come to the assembly and lay out the case why this person should be confirmed? Perhaps it's the chief of staff, perhaps it's the mayor themselves, perhaps it's just the appointee themselves. But to have the HR director do it, when we now know the HR director is sort of has all these other roles, and I think we all sort of understood that at the time, but it was just what this administration was doing, and there was a lot of pressure last year that we, quote, give the mayor his team, and so it flew, but it probably shouldn't have. And so going forward, I want that question addressed. The second is to something that Kevin said, and he clarified that when he said we, he meant sort of the municipality as a whole, not the assembly, when it came to vetting and doing things like reference checks. And I think that is appropriate. Even if we do discover the question you're asking about, like what powers do we have to do background checks and those kind of things, it's incredibly resource intensive to do those kind of things. And frankly, the assembly does not have those resources. We as individual assembly members don't have the time. It's not really our role. And so we are presented with, we do have a lot of conversations with constituents and people that bring us concerns, but we are not private investigators. We are not HR professionals. We have to rely on staff, and we don't have that kind of staff in the assembly department. So it has to be HR doing those things. And that is a real challenge. If we can't rely on the verity of the truthfulness of the documents in our packet, it is very difficult for the assembly independently to stop that. My understanding is this investigation that public media engaged in was multiple journalists acting for several weeks, maybe many weeks, really digging into this stuff. And hopefully the HR department has something similar to that in terms of their capacity, but we just don't. So even if we discover we have this power, I just don't think it's practical, particularly at the beginning of administration, like last year when you just had dozens of confirmations coming before us. And, we confirmed almost every one of the mayor's appointments. I think there were 3 that we didn't, if memory serves. And of course, we were raked over the coals for being highly partisan and not giving the mayor his team, even though we confirmed the vast majority of them. But again, just drilling down, the resources exist in the administration. They have to be the primary people doing this kind of background check and verification.
Thank you, Forrest. Next is Kevin and then Chris.
Yeah, and I guess building off of that is we recognize that it's obvious the system that we have is broken or heavily flawed, and yet we're still having to work with it. So my next question is, listen, we still have positions that need to be filled, and we don't have a whole lot of faith in the current process as it is while they're investigating themselves to figure out what's wrong. So we don't know what's wrong, and if I have a piece of equipment that's broken, I don't continue to load it up. I put it in the shop and fix it. I find something to replace. What are our options to do other vetting, whether we have to, or whether the administration has to temporarily hire an outside firm to take over these screens till we know what the problem is? Or do we just continue to use the same failed system until we figure out what's wrong with it? So thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Next is Chris, and then I put myself in the queue.
Yeah, and I wonder if we're going to talk about the same thing. So the questions that are circling around what authority the assembly has versus the administration. I want to say that I will assert and believe truly that we may not have access to records created in the hiring process, whether it be background checks or other documents other than the resume at this time. We put in 1991 in the code the requirement of the resume, and so there may be other requirements we can levy. But one thing that I know we can do is, and I'll wrestle any attorney over this should they argue the opposite, that we can conduct records searches of public records that are available outside. And I think to Mr. Dunbar's point of we don't have the resources to do that because that's a job heretofore we have always assumed and has long been the practice of the executive to do this work, but clearly they've abdicated their responsibility for some purpose. I won't speak to what that purpose is. So for that, the chair and I have had some discussions about, at least in the interim, possibly hiring a third party that can help us do research on public records relating to the individual who might be an appointee coming before us, should there be questions that are raised. And so I don't want us to presume that we don't have authority. I just want us to recognize that we have to explore the nature of the authority that we do have. Public records are by virtue public, and therefore we have no restriction from what we can seek.
Thank you, Chris. And as I mentioned, we'll be getting an opinion from council. It's my understanding from some initial conversations that the assembly can't tell the administration, can't tell the mayor how to vet nominees. And so that's something that we'll be coming back to. I wanted to comment, Kevin, you had mentioned the system is broken. And I think that there are definitely some pieces that are not working in the favor of the residents, the municipality. And Daniel, you mentioned the library. I think I might think it's broken a little differently on some aspects of code, because this is a situation, and we have a strong mayor form of government. And the mayor, as we've talked about, has a lot of leeway, per the code, in recruiting and selecting executives for the mayoral team. And I guess to that piece of it, this is a largely unprecedented situation. And so I don't know if that means that aspect of it is broken so much as perhaps as we take a look at the full extent of legislative powers, that we can have a better balance, on our end. I don't know, but I definitely appreciate this conversation. I don't have anyone else in the queue right now. Are there others who want to speak? Anyone on the phone?
I'm okay, Madam Chair, just listening. Thanks to my colleagues for raising such great questions.
Thank you, Austin. We're about halfway through our time, and I had intended at the beginning of the meeting, we have public comment, audience participation at the end. And so what I would like to do now is open it up for members of the public who would like to speak for 3 minutes and up to 3 minutes. And then we'll come back, and if members have any other comments or questions, and then if the attorneys want to add anything as well. So we don't have a big timer in here, but I'll set my phone and I'll wave or interrupt when there's like 30 seconds left. So if anyone who would like to speak, any members of the public. Oh yeah, we'll take one of the microphones. Do you want to do the time?
Sure.
Okay. Oh, sorry. And welcome. If you would start by stating your name for the record and the area of the municipality in which you live, and the vice chair is going to go ahead and operate a timer for 3 minutes. Go ahead.
I'm Barbara Bachmeyer, and I live in East Anchorage.
Can you pull the microphone closer?
My name is Barbara Bachmeyer, and I live in East Anchorage. And last night I prepared a 3-page document of what I wanted to say, but having participated or listened in to the meeting so far, I've lined out lots of my comments. So I'll just kind of focus on a couple of them. I'm representing myself, although I have spoken with some of my neighbors, some military retirees, and other people who are as incensed about this entire Joe Giray situation as I am. On Monday evening, I read, I think, 3 or 4 articles in the media about the various different resumes that Joe Giray submitted to different entities and organizations under a request for employment. And I'm just alarmed that the resume that he submitted and that was accepted by the Muni in the HR department was accepted because it contained all kinds of false, misleading, patently untrue comments that could have been easily checked. And if asked, I could show you 5 ways to show whether or not a person's military credentials are correct. I can show you in a second 5 ways to do that. I can show you also several examples of how to check a person's academic transcripts to make sure they're correct. And what really astonishes me, and I have spoken with Nikki Shabaka about this, the HR director, I believe he did nothing. I believe he accepted the paperwork. I think he thought it was fine. I think he accepted everything that Mr. Giray said to him as truthful when it was not truthful. And he really didn't, perform due diligence. And I pretty much told him that. I really think that the bottom line here is that the system is broken. There needs to be an independent way to check the resumes that high-level leaders, people looking for high-level leadership positions submit to the Muni, because it's not happening. It is just not happening. And then with regard to the handout that we received here, I don't understand where it says that we can't tell the executive branch how to vet, because the goal of the vetting process, or the goal of this recruitment process, is to find the highest caliber employee for the various position. So I don't understand why we can't be more direct about that, but I guess that it is what it is. In my view, the vetting wasn't even done, and the process did not result in the highest caliber employee for the position of director of the health department. And so the bottom line that I assert right now is that somebody needs to be fired, and that somebody needs to be the HR director. I don't know how that process can go, but he has shown that he is a derelict in the duties that are ascribed to that position. He pretty much admitted to me that he didn't do anything. He has made statements to the public that are patently untrue.
So
Okay,
That
so
was
that's the
the-
bottom line. I just really think somehow a mechanism needs to be that he is dismissed of his position. And if
Thank
he
you.
refuses to resign, he needs to be fired.
And I believe Mr. Constant has a question for you.
thank you, Ms. Bachmeyer. I think that you have a unique perspective unique to a certain set of members of our community. You mentioned briefly veterans, and in particular, the resume and the qualifications that were asserted was 5 deployments into combat and Alaska National Guard experience in 26 or 24 years. Can you speak briefly to what this concept is and how it affects people who have actually served?
Yes, I can. And that was part of the testimony that I lined out. But I served on active duty. I was in the Women's Army Corps to start with. It was no cakewalk. I could have quit on many occasions, but I didn't. I served in a very difficult situation in the 2nd Infantry Division in Korea. I mean, people like me really went through a lot to finally earn the rank of lieutenant colonel. And for him to trot around that rank, insist on people calling him Colonel Joe, when as far as I can see, his only active duty was really in the Washington State National Guard and maybe sometime in the reserve. And I think the period was about 10 years. So honestly speaking, if he served 10 years in the National Guard and in the reserve, he should have earned a rank higher than E4. And I don't think he did. So the bottom line is, and my neighbor and I discussed this last night, he did not earn the military credentials that he trotted out, and he needs to face some kind of disciplinary action, either, well, I think I'm going on and on.
Is there a name for this kind of behavior?
Well, it's related to stolen valor,
Thank you.
but it's not stolen valor. Stolen valor is like wearing awards and ribbons and citations and stuff like that that one did not earn. In this case, it seems like he impersonated an officer, but I don't know how the Uniform Code of Military Justice would handle that.
Thank you.
Because, you know,
I just want to get that on the record from a
Yeah.
member of the public that is a concern. Thank you.
And there's another member who has a question as well. Go ahead, Daniel.
I just wondered if you would please email us your list of recommendations about how to get information about someone's accurate military experience.
oh, I can do that.
Thank you.
Do that. Mhm.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Bachmeyer, for your testimony and for your service. Are there any other members of the public here who would like to participate? Okay, we'll go ahead then and move on. Before we go on to the next item on the agenda, I do want to check in with Mr. Gates and Mr. Falsey if they have anything they want to add.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wasn't expecting to actually speak to this matter here today, but I do have 3 thoughts that I would share with you from listening to the discussion on this topic. And first is that Mr. Dunbar mentioned the importance of the commas in that charter section by pointing to, and that's very true, it's the mayor's duty to appoint based on qualifications. And the assembly members or confirmation vote, up or down. Of course, you want to make sure the person's qualified, but I have heard the mayor say in a few meetings during confirmation votes that if they're qualified, therefore you have to vote to confirm. And I simply disagree with that. Your vote is your vote, up or down, the way you want. And maybe someone's perfectly qualified, but you don't believe they're a good fit for the position for whatever other reason, and you can vote it down. So I would say that much. I think I've had some of my advice described here today, and I think it was on point. I would say that in terms of the confirmation power of the legislative branch, it's a check on the executive appointment power. And that is a legislative function, though. And so the charter allows the assembly to contract for professional advisors and services and carrying out your legislative functions. So you could contract for, like you were saying, someone to vet a mayor's proposed appointee. And as Mr. Constant described, or whatever other way, a contractor could vet independently of what the mayor has done. And so that's my third point was, I do believe it's true, cannot, as the assembly and legislative branch, tell the mayor how to conduct his vetting, in detail and so forth. But once the mayor submits his proposed appointment to the assembly, the assembly can do whatever you like, to do your own vetting before the confirmation vote. So you can do that public records wise and so forth. I doesn't mean you can force people to do things. You can do what you're able to do within your powers. So I think that also listening and reading some of the charter and code, that I do have a few ideas on some things that can be done to help improve the process. We do have in Chapter 23095 a confirmation requirements for the mayor to send a memorandum and requesting a confirmation hearing. I think one idea that I guess I will share now that's sort of off the cuff is, and we have that here in the code 33173, about prior to an executive employee being hired, submitting a resume and their application and so forth. And I think in 23095, we could direct that the mayor and his AM submitting an appointee to detail what vetting process the mayor undertook. And I see that with a grain of salt because I'm not sure how enforceable that could be, but it's something that you could put in part of the procedures requirements. And so that's just an idea off the cuff again. So, and then I guess we will be looking into this matter further going forward, and perhaps I'll have more to say, more of substance.
Thank you, Dean. And actually, before we move on to Bill, Chris, you have a question?
Two, actually, no. First, Dean, and you don't need to answer this straight away. This is one you can take your time to answer. But currently, under the code, the only section where the assembly appears to have the authority to swear someone under oath is after a subpoena. I'm wondering if we could make it a standard practice of when we have these confirmation hearings, have them testify under oath.
I will have to get back to you.
That's
on
fine.
that.
That's a fair answer, and one I expected. So second question, and I think you just helped me actually quite a bit. You suggested that the assembly could develop some standards for what it expects for in the AM detailing out the vetting process. And you suggested take it with a grain of salt because there is no real enforcement mechanism. But isn't it true that should they not present a memorandum with the proper details of vetting, whether they want to or not, the assembly could simply default to a no vote? This individual should not be confirmed because of lack of qualifications, because the vetting process wasn't clear. I mean, isn't that the enforcement mechanism we have, is just to say no?
Well, as I said in my first observation, you could vote no if you want to, and that seems like a viable reason, legitimate reason to do so.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Did anyone else? Go ahead, Forrest.
Yeah, just to put a finer point on that, we could establish a norm, but even if we put it in code, my belief is that code is unenforceable on us, if that makes sense. The charter gives us power to vote yes or no, and so it would have to be a norm rather than a rule.
What you mean by unenforceable on us is still any member could vote yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, and
It's the
I would never want to give up
core
that.
function
Yeah.
given to us by the charter, and I don't
Accurate.
think there's really many ways to, except maybe in certain not quasi-judicial hearings, in a traditional matter like this, there's just very little you can do to control a member's vote. That is, so
Yeah,
it's
I
just
would
norms.
Never seek to do that.
Thanks. Bill, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I don't know that I have too much to add to the substance of this conversation. I really appreciate the dialogue. I think we have our work cut out for us over on this side of the table. And certainly we'll be set to work on drafting. I think the Assembly's focus on how this transpired, how we build a better mousetrap going forward, and the focus on what cost it may have actually incurred for the municipality is a wise one. I do know from a different life that these director positions are positions of real authority and trust, and people are approving purchases, people are approving time cards, they're making representations and compliance reports to federal agencies and to making promises of representation to grantees and whatnot. And I do think it is really concerning, both as someone with that background and as a citizen, that if you have a person who has who has a demonstrated record of submitting things that were not accurate to the municipality, I do think it is worth a real good look at what happened during the nearly year-long tenure of the former director.
Thank you, Bill. Any questions from members? Kevin?
You know, I've never seen a business fail because it raised its standards. Usually it is when you lower your standards that something fails, and this is extremely frustrating. And I look forward to what we're going to do to improve this, because our citizens deserve the highest standard of individuals. You know me, I'm a limited government guy. So if you're going to have a small one, it better work really well. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Chris?
Thank you. And on that note, I just want to speak to the fact that this municipality is more than 45 years old, and that never before in the history of this municipality has this process failed us in this extreme. And so I believe the conversation with former HR directors and former individuals who manage the appointment process will be enlightening for us, because there is a common denominator in all of this that hopefully this process leads us to. I don't know necessarily that the process is broken in a global sense, or if the process is broken in the specific sense, but I hope that that's something that we are able to come to. And to Mr. Falsey, I would add, it's not just the impact on the muni, but it's also the impact on the people he supervised. Because to me, those folks were screaming to us for relief, and we had no relief to grant them, and we don't know what records were created against them in retribution for them speaking to us. So that to me is a very important piece of this conversation.
Thank you, Chris. Randy?
Thank you, Madam LaFrance. Sorry, let me get here. I just want to make a quick comment on some things that I've heard, and I agree with quite a bit of it. So I really appreciate that. But just want to caution us. You have, let's go through this. Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Steve Jobs, Michael Dell, Richard Branson, Ralph Lauren, I can go on. These are all people we all know. We all heard of their accomplishments, and they're all non-degreed individuals. So I like the vetting process, but we also need to recognize that talent comes in many forms and packages, and we always have to be open to that diamond in the rough that may be a critical thinker and take us in new directions that benefit the community. But again, they should still be vetted. So I just want to make sure as we look for resumes, that we are still open to, bachelor's, not necessarily, everyone has to be a PhD or a master's. So just a word of caution. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. So I don't see anyone else in the queue. At this point, if members have any other further thoughts or questions, perhaps we could have folks send them to you, Allie, since you're compiling the list of questions. And Chris and I will meet with Assembly Council and Legislative Services folks, Allie and Claire, and figure out the path forward and update the rest of the members in the body. And we'll come back to this soon. It's obviously a matter of tremendous concern and very serious, and we don't know the full impacts yet. Okay, we have about 45 minutes left. We'll go ahead and return to the agenda. Can everyone stay until 3? And is there a preference in terms of what to take up first, given that we may run out of time? Why don't we go ahead and, sorry, I hit the microphone there. Go ahead and jump to item D, Assembly Member discussion on pending business and any updates individuals want to give from committees or from boards or whatever involvement. And we can go ahead and start. You want to start, Daniel? That's not really fair to start with the newest member. Is this is this your first rules committee meeting? Okay.
My second
Well,
rules.
We'll
committee
start on this end. Sorry about that, but
That's
you know,
okay.
these are just generally informal discussions that are publicly noticed where assembly members can kick around ideas.
Got it.
And see if others want to collaborate or maybe, you know, share resources or however.
Great.
So Chris, do you want to
Yeah,
start?
thank you. I don't have much to report on today. Other people will probably report on the projects that I'm working on because mostly I'm working on projects with other people. There's one thing that we accepted a resolution from the Youth Commission at the last assembly meeting on Tuesday that requested regular meetings with them. And I don't think we're going to move to meet with them quarterly, but we're in discussions right now, and we'll have this conversation next time we meet with the school district, that twice a year we contemplate, probably just after the joint school board meeting, that we host a joint work session with the Youth Commission in which we take the opportunity to work with the school district to invite in their student leadership groups so that we have very broad participation of youth in this community and hear really good voices so the Youth Commission themselves can also hear as well as be heard. So we are going to finalize that kind of approach in discussion with the school district because we can't really require their groups, leadership groups, to come together. But that's the one thing I'll report to you.
Thanks, Chris. Forrest?
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple things on what Chris just said. I forgot to pull this and talk about it at the meeting, and which I guess was a good thing because we went right down to the wire. But we used to get invited to the AMYA graduations, and I probably went to 5 or 6 graduations. And I'm not sure if it's getting caught by my spam folder or something has changed, but I would urge, hopefully as somebody to communicate to the Military Youth Academy that the graduation happens over there in Denina Center. Obviously, there was a little bit of a pause during COVID, but it's a great event. Again, I used to go all the time, and I'd love to get that on our calendars and hopefully get an invite. And usually there's kind of like a separate little pen where they put all the elected officials, which is fun, towards the front. So that's one. Second, just sort of very broad to get people thinking about this. We are entering budget season again, and Austin and I are obviously co-chairs of the Budget and Finance Committee, and there isn't too much to. I mean, you start thinking about your priorities, and if you have things you want to, at this point, you should be communicating with OMB and reaching out to them if there are things that you want to communicate to this administration. This administration is not operating the way the prior administration did, where they were sort of actively taking suggestions and then building it into the initial proposed budget. I guess I would suggest if anyone from the administration is listening that was a successful strategy we used in years past, because it means there will be far fewer amendments when the time comes for the assembly to decide what the municipality's budget is. And so if they can build our suggestions, for example, one year I just told the prior administration, don't cut the library. That's my one request. Do not touch the library. And they didn't. And so that made things a little bit easier. Third, and this was, we pushed this to September 13th, but there's going to be a work session. The exemption ordinance that myself, Ms. Quinn Davidson, and Chris are working on, the version that's in your packet is not going to be the version that we eventually vote on. If I have my druthers in that, it leaves out a very key feature, which is increasing the percentage of value. As it's currently structured, it's actually regressive on homeowners at kind of the lowest end of the wealth spectrum. And so there will be an S version. We're going to have a work session in the coming weeks. I hope people are able to attend. I presented the initial idea to the Budget Advisory Commission today, and hopefully they will be working at their September 8th meeting on a resolution, if we can get them sort of the necessary information in time before the because they will vote on the 8th, and then on the September 13th, obviously we will have the public hearing and the vote. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Forrest. Kevin?
Thank you. I don't know if this is the forum for this, but I really think that we should, because of time being of essence, we address the school bus shortage, or school bus driver shortage. I know a lot of people on this board we talk about equity, we talk about inclusion, and the lack of school bus drivers directly affects those individuals that are in the lower income bracket. Okay. They can't afford to take off from work. They can't afford to go run their kids back and forth. This is a really big concern, particularly now that we finally have school going back together. Now we can't provide basic transportation. And I'm curious on what the administration is looking at as far as we have a lack of school bus drivers, but we have other departments with CDL licensed drivers. Have we looked at taxing some of those individuals? What are they doing as far as pulling from other areas of the municipality where we have the individuals? Because we have the buses, we just need qualified individuals to drive them. And I'm kind of curious on what those efforts are. We've got a week. We've got a week of today. School starts in 7 days. So let's prioritize this. Thank you.
Can I ask?
Thanks, Kevin. Go ahead, Forrest.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think a question also for the administration and for our own legal team is we are capped by the state of how much funding we can provide the school district, and we always give them the maximum we're allowed to. And so I'm wondering, I don't think we can give them a direct grant, for example, to increase, like to try to give bonuses or something like that. And your idea about maybe using municipal employees, I think that is more likely to be legally compliant. But I guess I'd have to know if it's because it's such a clearly a school function, if that makes sense. If the state law prevents us from doing so, I would argue that it doesn't, because we have in the past, we still do give cards out for city buses to allow them to ride for free. So it's clearly a shared function in that regard. But yeah, I just want to make sure we don't run afoul of state law. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Forrest. And I need to share an email that I received back from Superintendent Bryant. And he had said that our leadership teams are discussing synergies. So he had said that connecting to community networks to connect ASD with licensed drivers already in the city is a big focus. The most time-sensitive ask is help get the word out to the community about serving as a bus driver in a part-time or full-time capacity for ASD. And sorry, I'm just scanning it. I will send this to everyone. There was some conversation about looking into, or I asked the mayor about the people mover drivers and, what possibilities or, changing routes, because I agree with you that this is a really big potential impact on a lot of families, especially those in particular economic demographics. Did you want to add?
Just that I hope we don't get in our own way. And what I mean by that is a lot of time the bureaucracy of, hey, you're not part of this union, you're not part of this. And we categorize ourselves unintentionally into these boxes, and then we get in our own way. And I just want to make sure that we're focused on the kids and getting them to school, and that doesn't become an issue. And if that is an issue, if we have drivers and there's that, I just pray that we're doing what's in the best interest of the individuals and we're not hampering ourselves due to policy. So thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. And the other thing that I had asked about was, are there any plans to extend on-site before and after school programs? That might make it a little bit easier for families, especially since it's going to be like on a rotating basis and it's hard sometimes to get in for childcare for just a short amount of time. And Chris, you had a comment?
Yeah, thank you. I believe every driver in public service is a member of the Teamsters, and I know the Teamsters are aggressively seeking drivers right now, and they're working on this situation just like we are. So it's certainly a priority.
Thanks, Chris.
I do one.
Go
Just
ahead,
because this is
Forrest.
informal rules committee. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't make the point that John Weddleton would make if he were here, which is that we have built our city and our routes in such a way where kids aren't allowed to walk to school in a lot of cases. And yeah, he would make it more eloquently and more passionately than me, but it is also a policy and a city design feature of Anchorage that sometimes kids that live right across from the school are not allowed, or not by policy, not supposed to just cross the road. And in many cases, they can't safely cross the road because of the way we've built our roads. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks, Forrest. Daniel?
Well, that's sort of a wonderful segue. So I think projects that I'm interested on working on are policies that make it easier to build housing and that also help with the future design of our city, pushing us in a direction that would make it safer for non-motorized travel. A project that I am looking at right now has to do with parking minimums in Anchorage. And the planning department, they currently have a proposal they'll be bringing before us soon. They've been working on it for a long time. I've watched their presentation many times in various community council meetings. They've had a robust public process. Tom Davis has been working on it, Elizabeth Appleby, and I just have to commend them for the excellent work that they're doing. It'll be a sweet sort of a package deal that they're bringing forward that would have implications on parking requirements, but also site access. So things like how wide a driveway can be. They've done wonderful work. My personal feeling is that perhaps some of their proposals regarding parking don't go far enough. And I'm looking at potentially how can the assembly take this, and where the parking department, or rather the planning department has walked, maybe we can take this and run a little bit with it. And so I've been talking a little bit about this. I hope you don't mind me saying with both Kevin and Forrest, and just taking a look at this and seeing how we can make this the best policy. Take what they're going to bring us and make sure that the final version of it is something that really pushes us in a strong direction when it comes to making it easier for developers to build affordable housing projects that are going to pencil, and just establishing new norms. I thought it was, I was able to attend the Roger Brooks presentation, and he was very clear, very salient when he talked about cities need to be about people, not about cars. So I want to, in this open noticed format, just sort of prime the assembly that this is something that I am looking at potentially how we can maybe not only reduce parking minimums, but eliminate them entirely citywide. So stay tuned. Yeah, please.
Yeah, we had a great meeting at the ACDA yesterday, and so you probably want to get with Mike Robbins because they're on fire about the Brooks presentation. They're already, I know the administration is trying to put together a blue ribbon task force. We spoke briefly about that. And so, I think that presentation has a lot of momentum going on, and the ACDA, who runs Easy Park, they recognize their fingerprints in some of that and being in some of that design criteria. I appreciate that greatly. Thank you.
Yeah. I was able to meet last night near Ship Creek with a sort of band of advocates who are really passionate about this issue. And we had a great meeting, and something maybe that I would like a little bit of guidance on and help with is if we have a work session on that proposed ordinance, can I bring in somebody and kind of talk about what other cities who have done this, what their experience has been like. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Daniel. We'll go ahead and move to the phone. Austin?
Hi, sorry about that. I had to rush over to my phone to unmute.
Sorry, didn't give you much of a heads up.
I think, no, it's fine. I think that Forrest covered the big pieces we're working on, which is both the ordinance that Chris and Forrest and I are working on regarding property tax exemptions, and then just sort of getting ready for budget season, working through committee on trying to find the best solution for fuel costs or any other costs. For instance, we had an email from Chief Curl today saying that they've run out of funds to either impound or tow junk vehicles. So I reached out to him and said we'd be happy as the assembly to help brainstorm how to solve that problem as well. In terms of sort of larger policies, since I started on the assembly, I've been sort of irked by the fact that, well, even before that, that our charter and lottery school system is set up such that mostly affluent families lottery in to get their kids to go to out of neighborhood schools, most of which those schools do not provide busing or free lunches or breakfast, which is, it excludes people who have fewer resources and concentrates mostly white, wealthy kids into these lottery systems or charter schools. Anyway, not to ramble, but I think now that folks are paying attention to the fact that there isn't busing for regular schools, it's sort of bringing that issue back. I had met with the prior superintendent and a constituent prior to COVID, just try to start working on a solution, and then COVID hit and it just wasn't the top need and priority of the district at the time. But I'm interested in returning back to that and hopefully finding a way to make sure that all students, rich or poor, parents' ability to drop off at pick up at 3 p.m. aside, have the same educational opportunities. Thanks.
Thanks, Austin. Felix?
Thanks, Suzanne. Yeah, I think for me, primarily focused on a lot of the ongoing housing and homelessness work. I think as I stated during my committee report on Tuesday, there's going to be a lot of discussion at the committee meeting Wednesday, so I would highly suggest everyone be in attendance. It's from 11 to 1 o'clock. We extended it a little bit because there's just too much to talk about. And then I guess, just a little bit of a snide comment. I guess the other thing that I'm working on is, as the mayor alluded to during the meeting on Tuesday, continuing to harass the administration to get money out the door to house people. Thanks.
Thank you, Felix. Randy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So thanks, Austin Quinn Davidson, for the busing on charter schools. As a parent of the charter school family, we had to stop because we moved and couldn't get our kids there anymore. So that's definitely a need. Things that I am working on, I'm starting to dive into short-term rental, primarily focused around Girdwood, and how to better regulate that to improve the workforce housing market down there. And then something else that I'm starting to dabble in, as we see more and more e-bikes and big wheels or one wheels around town that are capable of going, 30 miles an hour, and you see them on our parks and trails. Do we need to start looking at how you better regulate those or limit the speeds before we get into an incident where someone gets hurt or we push them back on the street, and I guarantee someone will get hit by a car. So just want to start looking at that, seeing if that's a real need for the city. And that's about it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Randy. Chris?
Just would note that there are people who have walked down these roads, and I think that the chamber that might be a third rail, and Godspeed to you. So it's an interesting conversation that is very lively to talk about regulating those kind of things. But that wasn't why I asked to be in the queue. There's one AO.
Can you speak louder?
Yeah, there's one AO I forgot to mention that is in development with Ms. LaFrance and I, and that's a clarification of motions under Title 2.30, because Robert's Rules establishes anything that's not specifically spoken to in our code for our procedures. In Robert's Rules, a motion to postpone indefinitely is a secondary motion, not a primary motion. But in some cases, we use it as a primary motion. And so we just need to clean up the code in a very specific way to ensure that the way we treat our motions is within the rules that we have. And so that's a project that's coming forward. And I too spoke with Chief Curl about the need, and the need he talked about for junk vehicle clearing is $400,000 for what he anticipates for the rest of the year. And I think we need to find that, because what starts to happen really quickly is junk cars start to pile up all over town. And so just keep your eyes out for where cars are near the right of way, but not in the right of way. And they're probably not going to move anytime soon before we figure out what to do with this.
Thanks, Chris. Kevin?
Thank you. Actually, in my excitement to deal with the school bus issue, I am working on some streamlining the structural plan approval. And that is right now on single family and duplex, you can use third-party engineers in order to do plan approval. I'm looking to extend that through commercial. You know, it's not uncommon for a builder of a triplex, fourplex, or a small commercial project to end up in taking structural plan approval to take 8 months to a year, which nobody can bid on a job. It makes it very, very frustrating, and it's detrimental to some of these projects. So currently working with Adam has been fantastic, Adam Tromley, and a lot of individuals down at the down in the building department on what that looks like. Apparently, there's already been some legal research that was done several years ago on the legality of that. But I'm working on streamlining the structural plan approval to allow contractors to hire a third party who has air and emissions insurance and the right qualifications to certify structural plans. They still need building permits, everything, but how do we get these plans and get the construction going? And on top of that, also streamlining some of the permitting process on allowing landlords to remodel individual units and getting them up to par without having to do a code compliance on the entire building. Many of you may not realize this, but there's large apartment buildings where individuals have significant equity and little debt, and they're afraid to remodel them. They just use them for storage, because when you come in to try to do a remodel, they'll do a code compliance on the entire building. You got to bring the whole thing up to code. Well, landlord's incentive is just to leave. I don't want that. They can't afford it, because then they run into issues. So then they just don't do anything. They don't have much debt on it. The holding costs aren't much. So they'd rather hold 2 or 3 vacancies than run a risk with code compliance on the entire building. So is there a way to work within that to allow them to individually address the units to get them up and running? Because we have a housing shortage, and working within our unit count is a streamline, because new construction does not go to affordable housing. All new construction, unless it's subsidized, goes straight to Class A. It doesn't create an affordable issue. So working within the code that we've codified in some of the processes in order to genuinely create affordable housing quickly, efficiently, and get out of the way of construction is what I've been working on. So thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Go ahead, Chris.
So we all received a letter from, I think it's the building board, and it raised some concerns about an amendment that we added to the building code. You brought this, reminded me of this, Kevin, that they argue that one of the code changes that we made is against the state law, and that was allowing the a private property owner to do contracting work on their own buildings that they don't reside in. And I believe we made exemptions for electrical work, which isn't allowed. You have to get permits and do everything through the same review process, but they suggested we didn't. So it's in legal review right now, and it may come back before us as a proposed potential change. We have to go back in and clean something up. That was what, for those of you who were here at the time, was commonly known as the couples amendment. And we probably have to readdress that, but I'm hoping we don't. I thought we caught it. So there's some analysis being done right now.
Thanks, Chris.
No, I'm familiar with that, because I've utilized that. You still hire a contractor. You can do the work, but the contractor oversees it or has to be on site when you do it. I don't know if that's it, but I'd love to see what that note is so I can see how it's being applied. All right. Thank you.
And if not, we can.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you, Kevin. I will just add, as far as legislative priorities, Chris mentioned the one pertaining to the rules of procedure and main motions, which we talked a little bit about, I think, in the last Rules Committee meeting here. And then just on the budget priorities, we will renew our efforts to meet with the administration before we start those budget meetings, because as Forrest said, it really does save time to talk through priorities and reduce the number of amendments potentially. And the administration did decline to do that last year with us, and I'm hopeful that maybe this year they will be willing to meet and talk through some of the legislative budget priorities. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to agenda item B, concerning government-to-government relations between the Muni of Anchorage and the Native Village of Aklutna. We do have a joint meeting scheduled with the Native Village of Aklutna on Thursday, August 25th, 4 p.m. I believe it will be at the Denina. Is that correct, Chris?
Likely, but TBD.
Oh, TBD. Okay. Location TBD. And just so members know, I have asked Chris to be the point of contact. So with the Native Village of Aklutna. So he is working through details and some of the stuff pertaining to agenda. There is a fact sheet, a background sheet that Claire put together that we will share with the members. And just to recap a little bit, on January 14, 2021, the Assembly approved an ordinance to establish government-to-government relations between the municipality of Anchorage and the sovereign Native Village of Aklutna by amending Anchorage Municipal Code, which became effective immediately. Joint meetings are part of AO 2020-137S, which established the government-to-government relations between the municipality of Anchorage and the sovereign Native Village of Aklutna. I believe the sponsors were Chris, Forrest, and Cameron on that ordinance. The two entities held their first joint meeting on May 27, 2021, and the second one on December 8, 2021. And we have the third one scheduled for a couple weeks from now on August 25th. And I know there was some conversation on the floor when we had that code change to delegate the point of contact in the same way that the mayor can, the chair can delegate someone. And there were questions concerning the history. So this fact sheet will be, we'll get this posted to the Rules Committee meeting website and also distributed to members. So you will have that as a reference to the timeline and the supporting code and the details and the changes that the ordinance implemented. And I don't know if Chris or Forrest, who were those original sponsors, want to add anything. This is fairly new in terms of the meetings with Aklutna. And agenda-wise, I think do we have an agenda yet for that one? Not yet. Okay. Forrest, did you want to add anything about, okay. And then do members have any questions?
One thing.
Go ahead, Chris.
I noticed that we might want to have discussions with Aaron, again, the three of us, and look closely at that code and see if we need to make any conforming amendments to that section. So there were just a couple of things that caught my attention. Like we use the words, the Assembly and the Village of Aklutna shall meet. And I think that the code shouldn't say that because we don't have the power to compel them and it feels wrong. And so I think what the code should say is the municipality and the Native Village of Aklutna agree to meet, and then they cannot agree at some point. And so I think maybe at some point before the end of the year, we'll sit down and have a conversation about looking closely at that code and make sure we said what we meant we said.
Thanks, Chris. And if members have thoughts for agenda items too, you can, I guess, send those to, that be you and Claire, Allie or Claire, and we can get that on the agenda for those meetings. Okay, I don't see anyone in the queue. We had one other item, and I don't know, Allie, if you want to take time now to go over the communications plan, or if you'd prefer to do that later. I know there's not a whole lot of time left.
Let's go ahead and tackle that later.
Sounds good. Okay, on the unfinished business items, Dean, did you want to comment on the update and the potential lawsuit with the state of Alaska? I believe you were going to follow up on an ETA from
Yes,
ISIS?
sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. So this topic was brought up first, I think, at our March Rules Committee meeting. At that time, well, first for clarification, there's no actual lawsuit right now, but there was some talk of a potential lawsuit because of the inequity to Anchorage and the education funding we get from the state. as compared to other school districts around the state of Alaska. It's a result of the district cost factor that's in our state statute, and the legislature, they need to update it. Basically, they last updated it in 2007, or effective 2008 through 2013. And for 5 years, they had 5 columns for how the district cost factor would change year to year. 2013 forward, they would just use that last column. And so that's almost, that's 9 years now, right? And its effect has been sort of to deprive Anchorage of the amount of funding we probably should get if they were updating that district cost factor. So sorry to just describe the substance of what that potential lawsuit was about. So there were, at the time, 3 bills in the legislature last March to sort of address the problem. This could be a legislative solution rather than a litigation solution. And of course, legislation would probably be more efficient and a better approach, or yes, and probably less costly. So 3 bills were HB 272. And I guess before we get excited about anything, all of them died before when the session ended. So there's no bills that passed. But I guess it might be something to consider for the Assembly's legislative priorities to add for the upcoming legislative session to do something similar. HB 272 would have increased the base student allocation. And so that's one other component of school funding for school districts, base student allocation to for FY 2022 and FY 2023. And then HB 273, it would have put in an inflation proofing formula for the BSA. Right now, the state statute, just the BSA is X dollars, so it needs to be updated by legislation from the Alaska legislature. Instead, HB 273 would put in an inflation proofing factor so it could automatically be increased by the CPI increase year to year, or I'm not sure if it was year to year, but it was something like that's the concept. So both died. And then HB 259, I'm sorry, I guess both those House bills, or all three, both those House bills sort of traveled together. They were in the House and they went to 2 committees, and then they died in April before the end of session. Whether action was taken, they didn't get to the Senate. And then HB 259 was a bill to provide better funding mechanism in general by latching on to the permanent fund dividend. It would change the PFD formula. So 25% of the percent of market value formula, the percent market value allowed for the state to use, 25% of that would be for dividends, and then 75% for other funding, half of that 75% for school funding. And so that would sort of just have some protection for school funding statewide. Anyways, that one didn't get very far either. It had last had a committee hearing in February. So things to consider for future legislation for your state legislators. And then last March, also at that time, we had, I had reported that the legislature, what they do for updating district cost factors is request a study, and they did that in 2005 from UAA's ISER, Institute of Social and Economic Research. And when I talked to, I actually called ISER to ask, are we going to do something soon or anything? They said, oh, we actually had a request from the legislature. And so the follow-up now is ISER sent the whoever requested it from the legislature a proposed funding estimate for the legislature, but then they never heard back. So no funding was provided to start a study on the district cost factor and how they should be recalibrated. So ISER didn't do anything since then. There was no action from the legislature to actually hire them to do the report or the study. And so unfortunately, nothing has happened. And then I guess, those are the things that I wanted to follow up on. I didn't want to rehash my presentation from last March, but if you had any questions, I'm open.
Thank you, Dean. Any questions? Okay, thanks so much. The last item on unfinished business, Anchorage School Board Assembly Working Group to address the dangerous street crossings on school routes. I know Daniel and Randy are the two assembly members who'll be working on that. I know, Daniel, you and I had talked, and I believe I have an action item on that to talk to President Bellamy and see who they have. Or, of course, you and Randy are welcome to do that as well. However you prefer. We can talk offline if you want.
Yeah, great. Yeah, let's figure that out. I think it's very timely with some of the conversation we were talking about with the limited busing. So, yeah, we should initiate that conversation. Yeah.
Agree. Thanks. Anything else that anyone wants to bring up to discuss here? Okay, we'll go ahead then to audience participation to see if there's anyone else here who, I don't see anyone new who came in or on the phone. Okay. I do want to thank Chris for covering for me and acting as chair while I was gone. Thank you so much. I appreciate all the work you did, Chris.
I want
It's
to
good to be
just
back.
briefly say that I always get lucky when you leave, because for whatever reason it happened last year and it happened this year. The crowds calm down. They don't show up. I don't have to bang the gavel. It's like the easiest effort. I mean, we had a lot of work, but it's again a credit to you that when we're managing all that, for some reason, all the agitation shows up, but I didn't have any of that. So it was a pleasure to take over while you were gone. I got your easy meetings.
Thanks, I think. I'm trying to sort that out now. Thank you, Chris. I do appreciate it. Kevin?
Yeah, and nothing personal, Chris. You did a great job. I'm really glad that you're back.
That is very kind. Thank you, Kevin. It's good to be back, and appreciate you all being here today at this meeting and all the work of staff and the work of the members. Thank you so much, and have a good rest of your day. We'll see some of you tomorrow at our work sessions. We are adjourned.